Where do teenagers get their information today?
That's a great question.
TikTok? What are they going to do now?
40 days, they're not going to have any TikTok. What's funny that...
Welcome again to another episode of Midweek Moments with St. John's Baptist Church of Charlotte. Thanks for trusting us with this time. For the next few weeks, you're going to be introduced to Nate and Emma Dove. Our search team has been working for several months, as most of you know, and Nate Dove has been called by the church to serve us as minister with youth and young adults. And as Nate and Emma have moved to the city now, we're excited. They're among us and they're with us. And so this is our opportunity to become better acquainted with them. So, Nate and Emma, welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome to Charlotte and welcome to St. John's.
Thank you.
I know that this is not the way in which any of us planned for you to move to town. And I know that getting moved during times like this and having to quarantine and be with families and transition made it a little bit of a challenge. How you doing?
Very interesting.
I think we're both just thankful to be moved in at this point.
Yeah. I don't recommend moving during a pandemic. I think that if you could avoid it, avoid it. But if you have the right opportunity, and this is the right opportunity, it's well worth all of the frustration and challenges of moving.
And you all should know that not only have they moved into their townhome over in Noda, here in a part of Charlotte, they've also brought with them another family member, and I'm going to ask them to tell us a little bit about this person who has four legs, who lives at their house.
Yeah. So Emma has a conspiracy that golden doodles, which is our dog, is a golden doodle named Rufus. The golden doodles are actually humans in dog costumes. So when you use the word person, I think it's pretty much how we feel about, and how he acts and how we feel about it.
Now, having met Rufus, I would agree.
Yes. So he's our closest thing to a child.
Yeah, he's our fur child.
Mm-hmm.
His name is Rufus. He's afraid of everything. We adore him.
He seems to be adopting to city life pretty well. He's enjoys all of the new smells and is always unsatisfied with the length of time in which we walk him. He could be outside. Well, let me back that up. Rufus only likes being outside with a human. He doesn't like going outside by himself. But when he loves going on walks, and he's really interested in all of the different streets and places we can walk in Noda. So he is enjoying his new house.
Oh, good. Well, all of our folks who have animals in their own home, and pets in their households, will fully understand what you're describing. They are family members, and we've had pets over the years, and I fully understand that. Well, I wanted just to begin by asking you to talk a little bit about yourselves. Kind of where you grew up, your family background, and some experiences in childhood and maybe in your adolescence that you think are still formative as to life experiences for you.
You want to go first?
No.
So I grew up in North and South Carolina, almost equally in both until I went off to college, or actually until I left for divinity school. I'd spent about half of my adolescence most of my childhood, I will say, in South Carolina. I moved to North Carolina when I was 12, so most of my adolescence in North Carolina. Moved from Lancaster, South Carolina to Mooresville, North Carolina when I was 12 years old. And then a few years later, my family decided that they were done with the big city of Mooresville and decided to move to a small town on the other side of Lake Norman called Denver, North Carolina, which at the time there was nothing happening in Denver, North Carolina. It was all just a stoplight. And when we moved to Denver, it was, they had just built and finished the Walmart. So that was like the main
So you knew
thing.
Civilization was on the way.
Yeah, so there was a Walmart and a Lowe's and a stoplight. And now it is becoming quickly, Charlotte is encroaching on up 16, which you can get to Denver in 35 minutes, to my parents' house for 35 minutes, really to Denver in about 25 if there's no traffic.
Right.
But yeah, it's slowly moving its way up there. People are finding it's affordable. You can get to Charlotte quickly on 16. And so, yeah, it's changing a lot. It's changed a lot since I left there to go to college. But yeah, I lived there from the time I was in middle school all the way through high school. There are people at this church who graduated from my high school. I don't know if you know that. Do you
I
know
did
that?
not know that.
Yeah. So Bobby Sherrill went to East Lincoln many years before I did, but she's the East Lincoln alum.
Yeah.
And then Kimberly Faust went to East Lincoln.
So
So there are East Lincoln alumni who are part of St. John's, and there are a couple families that have emailed me telling me they live around the lake. So there are people connected.
Oh yeah, we have members up that way.
Mm-hmm. So people know Denver. And Charlotte was always, even like before I moved to Denver, Charlotte was always sort of like the hub of my life because it was the closest big thing to everything, everywhere I lived. So even in South Carolina, you know, my parents grew up in Rock Hill and Chester, Rock Hill is now basically a suburb of Charlotte, or quickly becoming one. And that's 30 minutes away, and Chester's 40 minutes away. And so Charlotte was always the place that was kind of in the distance, but you knew about it, and there was a lot going on here. And so throughout my life, Charlotte was mostly just coming to go to Panthers games and concerts, and I mostly I told a lot of people this since I've gotten here, is I mostly just knew Uptown Charlotte and the Time Warner Cable Arena and Bank of America Stadium and the few blocks around those things. Right. I didn't know about all these other neighborhoods. And I think like any big city, with Charlotte, the good stuff is in the neighborhoods outside of the downtown, and now we're just really getting to discover those.
Yeah.
So I guess I started talking about Charlotte, but my childhood has always been around Charlotte.
Yeah. Well, and with the growth of Charlotte, and when you're a kid growing up, your world is so small anyway. And so Charlotte sort of was this distant city out there that impacted your life, and you knew it was close by, but you didn't have to study it so much. Your parents or somebody took you there.
Yeah. Are we talking about faith yet? Are we getting into faith backgrounds as childhood?
I think we're talking about formative childhood experiences, which could include faith.
Could, in theory, include faith.
Yeah. Anything you want to add?
No. Well, where did you grow up? And then we'll go back. We'll circle back.
I grew up in Macon, Georgia, and
now help people understand exactly where is Macon, Georgia.
Okay, so if Georgia is a hand, Macon is like basically in the middle of the hand. So Atlanta's up here, Savannah is down here,
Right.
Augusta's up here, but Macon's just like right in middle Georgia, smack dab. And in contrast to Nate, I never moved. So I think that was one of the things that kind of drew us to one another, is that Nate moved every year, a couple of years as he was growing up. And I grew up in the house that my dad grew up in.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I think my dad still wants his ashes scattered in that lot. Like, he's very rooted in that place, and so am I. And so, yeah, I grew up at 2468 was our address, very even keeled. And I grew up going to a Baptist church, First Baptist in Macon. My parents were very open-minded, always invited me to explore, ask questions. I grew up going to public schools in Macon all the way up. So, yeah, that's a bit of a contrast for us, is that I stayed in place, never moved. May have made up for that in my adulthood, but yeah.
And so you grow up in homes where neither one of you is an only child.
Mm-hmm.
And so you grew up as relational beings, having to figure out how to get along with others closer to your age, right? So help us with that a little bit.
I grew up with a brother and a sister. My sister is 3 years younger than me, 2.5 really. So she is now 25, 24, wherever the math falls. She'll be 25 in December. So she's a recent graduate from UNC. And then my brother is significantly younger. He's 10 years younger than me. So he is now entering into his junior year of high school.
Okay.
And we're all very different from one another, I think, and in our interests and hobbies and what we've chosen to do.
Mm-hmm.
I would say you and your brother probably.
We're really similar.
Yeah.
So I have an older brother. So again, we have like a contrast here.
Mm-hmm.
Nate's the oldest and I'm the youngest. My brother is 4 years older and he's a lawyer, so a very logical
Mm-hmm.
thinker. And he got into ancient languages and things in college. So he studied Latin and Greek. And later, when I needed to learn Latin, it was really helpful to have him as sort of a, still an older brother, even though by that point we were both in our 20s, sort of guiding the way. But yeah, he still lives in Macon, went off to law school in New York, but made his way back. And yeah, we're very close. Yeah.
And your parents are still living in the house that you left home to go off to college?
Yeah, in Denver. Yeah, so they're still there. They've been very helpful as we've been moving. So, it's good to be closer to them. It's also, we're closer to Emma's family too.
Mm-hmm.
Only 4 hours away from Macon, so it's a far cry from the day that we were away.
Yeah.
How far is it to Boston?
A solid 18, 19 hours to Boston, probably from Macon.
My
Yeah.
mom used to make that drive.
Mhm.
Bless her.
Well, help me with, or help all of us, understand what were some formative experiences for each of you as you grew up, that might have impacted your faith journey. They may have impacted the way in which you became aware of who you are later on. But talk a little bit about formative experiences in childhood and adolescence.
So I think for me, faith has always been a vital part of my life. And by that, I mean, I grew up in church like a lot of people in the Southeast, but I took an interest in it early on. There was something about community and the question of who I was in relationship to God, I think that was interesting to me.
Yeah.
I also found the Bible as a book to be fascinating growing up. It's just full of mystery and intrigue, and so you're dissecting it and figuring out more about it was always interesting. So I am what you would probably have described as a Sunday school kid. So I liked going to church. I liked going to Sunday school. Since we moved so much, I don't have what I would call a home church. I've also since, I'll get into this, I'm sure, but have migrated away from the tradition that I grew up in. So I don't have, like Emma has a home church, you would call it. I don't have one of those really, but I grew up in a Southern Baptist context, in a more conservative evangelical context, and that was what I knew and what I was involved in until I went off to college. And that's when I started asking questions about who I was and who God was that pushed back on what I had been taught. But I think that in terms of my growing up, I have come, even though I no longer identify with the Southern Baptist tradition that I grew up in, I can look back favorably upon some of my experiences in church. Some of the people and the experiences, some of the youth times that I had, and I'm grateful for them. I'm grateful for the friends that I made, and for the connections, and for the work that we did. And I can also look back on those times and think, wow, I can't believe I thought that about myself or thought that about God, and know that I've come a long way. So it's a lot of perspective shifting. So, like I said, I grew up Southern Baptist in North Carolina, evangelical. When I went off to college, at UNC Chapel Hill, that's when everything changed for me. I started taking religion classes. I started being exposed to questions and people that I had never met before in my life, because if you grow up in the South in a small town, the chances of you meeting someone who is different from you are relatively small. When you go off to college and you meet people who come from all sorts of backgrounds and lifestyles, you're exposed to folks from all over the spectrum, and that was helpful to me. And then taking religion courses that sort of pushed at the house of cards that was my faith, I think, really prompted me to wrestle with what was important, what was not. And for me, growing up, I was always told that the Bible was the Word of God and everything in it is inerrant and true, and there's not one thing wrong with it historically, and I accepted that. And then when I went off to college, when one little card was pulled out of that tower, the whole thing was supposed to come crumbling down, and that was difficult. But then I had to restructure what was important to my faith, and it wasn't that the Bible was inerrant. That wasn't the thing that was the foundation of my faith. And it took a long time to try to figure out what was the foundation of my faith, having grown up in the evangelical world. But it was more of a God who cared about justice and love and about community, and then a God that was so rigid and paradigmatic. It was something more than that. So I would say, in terms of my years on this earth, the most formative time for me and the most crucial time for my development was college. It absolutely changed who I was, and completely shifted my life.
Yeah. I think you as a youth minister, I have seen you try to prepare students to go off to college and not have that experience also. So not arrive at a new place and have your whole faith system fall apart.
Yeah.
Right? That's not, I'm not answering the question, but I'm just like, this is something I've seen you put into work as a minister.
Well, what's really important for my ministry now is making sure students are exposed to the things that I was exposed to in college before they get there, so that they don't have this moment in time where their house of cards comes crumbling down. I don't want their house of cards to be, I don't want their faith to be structured like a house of cards. I want them to have a faith that is more than just a fragile system where if you pull out one thing, the whole thing comes crumbling down. Yeah.
Well, and you were one of the fortunate ones in that so many young adults go off to college and experience the deconstruction of their thought patterns and their views and perspectives and beliefs, but there's not anyone who takes an interest in them to help them do reconstruction. After the after the demise of everything, and you're sitting there looking at all of the ashes and the mess. There have to be some folks on campuses who realize that's real for a lot of people, but who make themselves available. And I know that, for each of you all, you discovered folks in your university journey that helped you journey through, to find some places where you could rebuild and find tools within yourself and some folks that you could trust.
Yeah, so I, like I said, grew up in that Baptist church, but started attending an Episcopal church when I was in high school. And looking back, that was almost completely because two of my closest friends were there. And so I was drawn there not by, like a love of liturgy, but for this community that I had with my friends. And at this really wonderful Baptist church that I grew up in, there just weren't that many other kids my age. And so I ended up at an Episcopal church. And when in college, I decided I wanted to go back to church, I found community in another Episcopal church, and ended up, that ended up being a wonderful part of my social and spiritual life in college, is the Episcopal chaplaincy at my university. And I guess the Episcopal world is kind of small, so by some chance, Nate and I met in divinity school at Yale, but one of the few Episcopal seminaries is called Berkeley, and it's centered at Yale Divinity School. And so 3 of my very best friends from the college Episcopal chaplaincy ended up being with us there at Yale in this strange set of coincidences. So I would say I made that shift over in high school to the Episcopal Church, and all of the chanting and sitting and standing and different hymns that everyone had memorized, all of that I had to get used to. Coming from the Baptist tradition, all I really knew were, a couple of hymns, and there was less asked of me in my Baptist services growing up. But I'm really grateful in my college ministry to have had a place where I could ask all of the questions that I was having to people that welcomed those questions and could offer me some answers, and also say, there's some ambiguity there, and let's just sit with it. So I'm still really grateful to the leaders of that Episcopal chaplaincy, because otherwise, I may have just continued not going to church in college and not have had an interest in going to divinity school, even though I went for different reasons than Nate did. But I think I had more of a gradual deconstruction, reconstruction experience than Nate did, which was a little bit less world-shaking.
Well, and yours probably didn't have the same contrast either, growing up in a home that was part of a progressive, for Macon, Georgia, First Baptist Church is almost as progressive as it gets in town for Baptists. And it's very connected to Mercer University right there down the street. Mm-hmm. And so for you then to ask those questions, it was not as distinctly different from what he was asking. It was more formational and nurturing that journey that had started there. And so from Chapel Hill and from Harvard, right? You all both decide, not knowing one another exists, that you're each going to go to Yale Divinity School. All right.
Yeah, we both also applied to Duke, and I would like to think that if one of us had decided to go, that the other would have too.
That's pretty. I like that.
Yes, it would have been the worst decision of our lives, however, had we gone to Duke.
Why? Just because you have Duke feelings?
Yeah.
From Chapel Hill to Duke, that would have been. For all those Dukies who've just heard this, we now will wait to hear you to see you wear a certain color of blue. Well, so you arrive at Divinity School, and Emma, you have said you end up at Divinity School for different reasons. Mm-hmm. So what was the reason that each of you all chose to go to Divinity School, and how did Divinity School frame that, form that, reframe that? Talk about that a little bit.
I think I'd always been on a path to some sort of theological education ever since I was young. I'd sort of set my eyes on that from middle to high school, somewhere in youth group. I think I knew that I wanted to do ministry or something tangential to ministry. As I grew up and went off to college, that started to shift a little bit as I started wrestling with my faith. I started to, when I went into college, I thought for sure when I left UNC I was going to go to Southeastern Theological Seminary. And that didn't happen. And
Amen.
yeah, yeah.
May it be so.
Yeah.
Yes, may it be so.
But
you did not.
as I was going through college and I was changing, I started to look at other divinity schools and to think about my vocation. There was a period of time where I thought I would for sure want to continue education and go off and to get the master's degree and then go on and do the PhD in New Testament. And I wanted to keep that option open, and so it became important to me to find a divinity school where I could do that, and there were Yale and Duke were places I could do that. And then I had a professor at UNC that told me that I needed to get over my Southern Baptist hangover, as he put it, and I needed to get out of the Southeast for a while and see a different part of the country and meet new people and be exposed to different religious climate. And he had gone to Yale, and it just seemed like a good school, good fit. And
So you go to Yale and meet a Southern girl.
that's right, yeah. And then it took all the way
Meet new
to
people, get out of your comfort zone.
yeah.
That's right.
Meet something that brought the comfort zone back up. Meet someone that brought the comfort zone
Well,
back
you,
up to
you,
New
you
Haven.
met someone though who was different.
Oh yeah, definitely.